Well, what's going on, guys? We are back to Chapter 7. I'm re-recording this because, as you know, I lost Chapter 7, or it's somewhere on my computer, on my hard drive. It could have been deleted, because I cannot find it anywhere. So I pretty much decided to just re-record this chapter. But I really don't remember a lot of what happens in this chapter. I do remember the stuff about Martha, the bird. Which I think we were told a story about some bird named Martha, and it was like a carrier pigeon or something like that. But yeah, other than that, I don't really remember too much about this chapter. So yeah, I guess we'll kind of be experiencing this anew once again. The other chapters I remember a lot more than this one, to be honest. But anyways, once I saw a beautiful bird. He was flying around in circles in the distant azure sky. Even though the time of birds has already ended, long since replaced by the age of man, our numbers multiplying across the earth, our houses growing ever taller, our civilization pumping out soot from factory smokehouses, the bird didn't seem to care about any of it. Onward and upward, even though the heavens no longer belonged to anybody, the noble bird flapped his wings as powerfully as his ancestors had in the skies of the ancient wild. But then there was a crack of iron. His wing was struck, and he lost his symmetry. His crumpled form scraped miserably across the ground. But he flapped his wings, as a bird, to the bitter end. Almost catching the wind with his eyes trained on the northern sky, he crashed into the parched earth. Well, that was just depressing. Now, that scene had appeared in my dreams, but though it left such an indelible mark on my heart, for some reason, my memories were hazy. I'm not really sure if this is Aoko, or Sojiro. I want to say it's probably Aoko. That bird. I wonder what it looked like. Time for school, children. What is this nonsense? Part 1. Okay, that's it for today's lesson. I ended up summarizing everything that would be on the exam, but that's just for you guys. Please keep it a secret from the other classes. You can consider it a special homeroom teacher privilege. See, I thought you all could have something to be proud of if your modern Japanese scores, at least, were at the top of the grade. Mr. Yamashiro smiled mildly and chuckled as he spoke. Yeah, I forgot about that guy, the homeroom teacher. That heartwarming concern, so typical of 2C's homeroom teacher, relaxed the classroom. Oh please, it's obvious what you're really after. We're not the ones looking for a confidence boost. Forget pride, you just want to save face since Mr. Sadanaka is always talking down to you. Hey, just come out and say it. We're too dumb, right? Well, it's true. This class is nothing but meatheads, though. Now, being a student is about more than test scores, so I have nothing to say about that. Besides, the teachers aren't that judgmental, so even if everybody fails, it won't affect my life one bit. But then, there is one troublesome person. The student body representative you all chose is really scary. She's always threatening us, saying things like, when test scores are low, it's because the instructors are incompetent, not the students. I'm prepared to file a report with the Board of Education at a moment's notice. And if their grades still don't improve, I'll just have to supervise them myself. What do you guys think about that? So is he actually scared of Aoko? I'm not really surprised. I think everybody's scared of her. The happy atmosphere in the room iced over in an instant. Yeah, everybody's scared of her. It seemed the students of Class 2C more or less understood who their true enemy was. That's right. You're the advisor to the student council, aren't you? Lord have mercy. She's the brute that got the cheering squad back on track after all. Getting a teacher fired would be child's play for her. She has money and influence, too, so... Right? I'm sure she must be lying about her age. There's no way a high schooler could pack that much of a punch. Yeah, especially compared to the girls in our class. Tits-wise, I mean. Well, he is right about that. Excuse me, but would it be possible to have Class A take just Konomi off our hands? All the boys are monkeys, but that guy's on a whole nother level. Hey, the Prez doesn't have the best grades either, you know. Even though she's in Class A, if I remember right, they're just above average. True, but who cares? She doesn't go to cram school. She runs the student council, and she even works sometimes. It'd be too disgusting if she was at the top academically, too. Yeah, she'd be too perfect. Totally. Leave first place to the vice president, I say. Alright, everyone. That's enough gossip. The devil has sharp ears, you know. Yeah, and she definitely heard all that, I'm sure, somehow. And study hard. If you score too low, your winter break will go up in smoke after all. Oh, and Shizuki, can I see you for a minute? Mr. Yamashiro gathered his teaching material, then stepped out into the hallway, beckoning Sojiro to follow. Class was out, but the hallway was empty. Though boisterous voices still clamored in the background, it was calm and quiet here. It was probably because the lack of windows made it feel a little too much like a prison. The students would rather spend free time inside classroom or on the balcony. What do you need? Oh, nothing major. I know it's not very sensitive to pull you aside like this before exams, but I was worried. How are you doing? Are you acclimated yet? Okay, yeah, I do remember the exams. Like, this is when they were taking exams. It's also weird that there's no, like, you know, I don't think I mentioned this, but there's no, like, obviously there's no voice acting in this game. So, like, whenever different people are talking, it's, like, hard to tell, like, okay, what kind of voice should I give this person? So, like, when the whole class is talking, I'm just like, whatever, screw it. I'll just give them all the same, like, my normal voice. His homeroom teacher's concern was unexpected, yet gratifying. It stood to reason. Recently, he'd suffered nothing but abuse at the hands of absurd humans, so even a trivial amount of consideration was enough to greatly buoy his spirits. Yes, I think I've got the structure and rules down more or less, and I'm making more and more friends too. Really? That's great. Our class may be full of loudmouths, but that means you don't have to watch yourself around them. I'm glad you're getting along. Sojiro's eyes sparkled. According to Aoko, Mr. Yamashiro was a damned no-good lout who had no business being a teacher, but he looked out for people in his own way. Ease up on the part-time jobs, too. Most places will give you time off if you tell them you have exams, so don't overwork yourself. And if you have any problems with exams, try asking around about them. Worrying on your own is a waste of time, especially when the school is chock full of people to talk to. Mr. Yamashiro waved goodbye and left. The naive country boy immediately took his teacher's useless advice to heart, nodding to himself as he walked back into the classroom. Well, Sojiro is nothing if not naive. And so... You wanted to ask about women? I do remember this part, yes. Dude, this was so weird. He just all of a sudden, like got into Sojiro's face. And he's like, you want to talk about girls? He didn't even wait a minute to put it into practice. I guess so. I'm in big trouble. I only realized it after thinking about it a lot, but apparently I've got a bad imagination. He looked down, embarrassed. No, I'm surprised you thought you had a good one, but, oh well, come with me. Here are my porn bags. Despite his astonishment, Kenobi took Sojiro by the shoulder and guided him to the edge of the classroom. When Sojiro had come over with a grim look on his face and said that girls are complicated, he'd almost burst out laughing, but looking back on it, this was the first time his friend had ever sought him out for advice. This man, who stoically persevered through nearly everything even at work, was worried. It must have been pretty serious. So? Did you fuck something up? I might. Soon. Kinomi, just as an example, imagine that a porcupine fish-like girl came to Mad Bear. What kind of a girl would that be? I guess somebody who's a soon, like someone we know. This girl despises me and wants me to leave, but I can't just up and quit. Yeah, I think I know who he's talking about. After all, I need the money, he continued fervently. For the time being, all Kanomi could do was nod. In other words, you want to ditch the witch. Ditch the witch. That's one way of putting it. The opposite. Somehow, I want to have her acknowledge me. I didn't mention it, but it's not like I hate her or anything. Sojiro furrowed his brow. The unusual caginess tipped Kenobi off to what was really going on. When women were involved, his mental faculties operated at triple speed. What's this? You're talking about pickup? You want to get cozy with her? Oh no. Oh, is this where they talk about how Aoko, like, beat up some dude for, like, following her home? Sojiro molded over for a bit. Then, he nodded slowly without really understanding what he was agreeing with. Oh no. Oh no. The problem is, I don't know what to do. To begin with, how do you have a friendly conversation with a girl your own age? What are you talking about? You chat with girls in class all the time, don't you? I'm actually jealous, you know. It's fine if you power through it with your natural ditziness. Being raised in the mountains is a rare identity, yeah? You gotta leverage those quirks, man. So he's really trying to give Sojiro advice on how to pick up girls. Does this dude even pick up girls? Like, I just get the impression he's pretty much all talk. Is that right? I was under the impression that quirks weren't good. And anyway, what should I do if they already hate me? Everyone in class is nice, but the person I'm dealing with is a porcupine fish. Actually, at this point, she might even be a real porcupine. In that case, don't get discouraged. Wait for her to lower her quills, then make your move. The crease in Sojiro's brow deepened. This was a bad example, but despite his confusion, it didn't look like he could think of a better one. Idiot, when it comes to women, you just have to flatter them. Find out what she's into, what she likes, and run with it. Put her needs before your own. Start by attacking from the outer moat. Now that is good advice. The outer moat. So I should be indirect? Natch! After that, well, a bribe is the most effective method. Lure her in with a gift. As long as it's something she needs, she'll accept it even if she hates you. And once she does that, she'll feel like she owes you. Sojiro felt an entirely unwarranted sense of trust in his friend, who enthusiastically declared that he'd had nothing but strikeouts so far. Yeah, that sounds pretty... it sounds pretty accurate, to be honest. There's just one problem, Konomi. I'm sure she'd be happy if I gave her food or something, but... You don't have the scratch, I get it. Hehehe, there's no two ways about it then. Since it's you, I'll let you in on a sweet gig. Another side job. Konomi pulled Sojiro further into the classroom. You should try being a gigolo? It's just, you know, that way you'll pick up girls and you'll make money. To an unpopular corner near the lockers. It would be several days before Sojiro realized it was a kind of unscrupulous solicitation that he couldn't tell anyone about. Oh, this sounds bad. What did he get himself into? That night, dinner at the mansion was a spread of bread. Wow, how exciting. Bread for dinner. A pile of sliced bread sat in the middle of the table, surrounded by an assortment of jams, a bowl of lettuce salad, and plates of ham of various thickness. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. Sojiro still didn't know what a normal dinner in a normal house looked like, but even he could tell this was strange. Yeah, I'd have to agree. Speaking frankly, it was shoddy as hell. We're still out of the chocolate spread. Didn't I tell you to buy some more? I spent the day in my room. Besides, you're the only one that eats chocolate. If you want more, you can get it yourself. That sounds about right for Alice. She spends the entire day in her room. But it seemed that as far as the girls were concerned, this kind of dinner was normal. Food-making duty was on an irregular rotation, and tonight had been Koonji Alice's turn. For her, being in charge of cooking meant doing the bare minimum to get by, and only making an effort for special occasions. And then we learned that this all came from a can. Of course, Sojiro had no way of knowing that was her philosophy. All he saw was a meager meal. On top of that, I mean, what is a meager meal to someone who's just came from the mountains and was raised in the countryside? Like, you know, well, I don't know, maybe they do have big meals, but... This seems fancy in comparison. Like, that's just the impression I get, especially considering he's in a fucking mansion. There wasn't really any conversation to speak of, except for the sound of clinking plates, creaking chairs, and the ever-ticking clock. The sunroom was deathly quiet. Incidentally, since Sojiro had already finished eating, he was merely observing the state of the sunroom from the parlor. Sojiro, you've got work at 9, right? Go ahead and go. You don't need to worry about us. Alright then. I'm gonna head out. He nodded and put on his coat. When he glanced back at the sunroom again, was it just his imagination? He could have sworn his eyes had met Alice's. And Alice doesn't care, or pretends not to care at least, because that is the Kudere nature. Alice had ignored him all day today, going as far as to avoid even looking at him. If she had been glaring at him for being a nuisance, that would have been at least understandable, but her gaze just now held no animosity at all. Maybe she was checking on the parlor? He took one last look around, then headed to the lobby. After she was sure he was gone, Alice broke her unnatural gaze. Man, what a pain. From Alko's point of view, she was being astonishingly transparent. Her feigned indifference was a dead giveaway. What, is the menu not to your liking? That goes without saying, but this is how it always is, so I'm used to it. What I'm amazed by is your nastiness. Studying his reaction so intently even though you're ignoring him. Just how big of a sissy are you? It's like you're waiting for a trap you set to spring. Well, that could be the case. Please, I have no interest in his reactions. Also, that was sexist. The term sissy is too disparaging towards women. What? Well, I mean, yeah, it is typically used towards guys, actually, so it is a little bit weird to have it used, for having to have it thrown at a woman, but I don't know, I guess maybe not. In this situation, it would be more appropriate to say I'm contradicting myself. Since when were you so self-aware? Alice ignored her roommate's needling and went back to eating dinner. Alko ripped off piece after piece of soft bread and popped them into her mouth, the amazed look frozen on her face. Alright then, let me ask you something as an accomplice. Is there really no way you can let him off the hook? I know it's impossible, but if it somehow turned out he was a Magus too, wouldn't you be able to approve of him living here? If that were true, I would. Though it wouldn't be approval, it would be a penalty on ourselves for missing something like that. Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you be able to notice if he was a Magus? I mean, unless he's really good at hiding it? Yes, while your suggestion just now is unquestionably absurd, the outcome of this situation is still not so absolute. Perhaps there's still a chance I'll accept his choice to live here. Even my resolve has been known to waver on occasion. Exactly. Right now you're only keeping calm out of pride and obligation, but if he works hard, then... Save your breath. It doesn't matter what he does. It won't change anything. Yeah, I'm calling bullshit on that. I'm sure you already know, but... To begin with, this girl can never let her guard down around others. In exchange for reproducing countless vessels and fairy tales, witches hated humans. Isn't that a personal problem? Justifying your own stubbornness with that lineage of witches crap is exactly why I called you a sissy. I don't care if you want to hate him, just be straight about it. This wishy-washy side of you makes me sick. I'm wishy-washy? Yeah, I mean, if you're going to ignore him completely. What you're doing is like shoring up the ramparts but leaving the castle gates wide open, ready to skewer your prey the second he slips up and steps inside. As your partner, I can't just stand by and watch. All he can do is open a closed door, so what happens when you take even that away from him? Sorry, but could you rephrase that? That metaphor is a little... She was hesitant to say it, but she had no idea what Alko was getting at. Faced with such sheer obliviousness, Alko's irritation seemed to boil over for just a moment. I mean, even I kind of figured what she was trying to say there. It's like, you're still leaving yourself open, you're half-assing it. I'm saying, don't freaking put the moves on him, then claim you're not interested. If you keep shooting him little glances, he's bound to misunderstand, you know. Alice keeps looking at me, so she must really want to make up after all. I'll go visit her room right away. That's definitely what he'll think. I don't know, he's pretty naive. He might not take the hint. That could happen? It could. If it were me, it'd be enough to make me snap and tell you to come settle things behind the school building if you've got something to say, bitch. God damn. Alko is a fucking delinquent. I see. I'll be careful then. I can see why people think she's a bully. After all, I don't really want to talk to him. I was looking at his limbs, not him. His limbs? Why? Limbs are limbs. He himself isn't interesting, but what happened that night is still fresh on my mind. I was a little concerned about that, and unintentionally let my eyes linger. By that night, you mean at the amusement park. Did he do something? The displeasure was written all over Alice's face. Apparently, she was still hung up on her defeat at Kitsyland. He jumped. From the roller coaster track to my dumpty. Yeah, I'm still kind of shocked he actually... I mean, Sojiro's got fucking balls of steel to do something like that. Oh right, I remember him mentioning something about getting carried away and jumping since it was only a meter. And, I don't know, I guess he must not be scared of heights, because like, if I was jumping from that high up, I don't think I'd be able to go through with it. That's way too high up. I would just fall and splat. Like, it'd be over. I don't care fucking how far away it is. You would still fall, too. Like, he did fall. You know, he had a great fall, because, you know, Humpty Dumpty, but, I mean, it's by some miracle that he didn't actually die by doing that. Fortunately, Alko hadn't borne witness to that scene. All she knew was that her spell was one of the reasons he'd pulled off a death-defying leap. Alice, on the other hand, saw the whole thing from atop the clock tower. It had scarcely lasted a moment, yet the sight of it had been even more enthralling than the destruction of the Snark, or Alko shooting down the moon from the Earth. Oh right, that happened. But so what? Don't tell me you want revenge for the egg. Breaking is Dumpty's job. I wouldn't begrudge him that. It's just, I didn't know a human body could move that way. Yes. To Alice, who rarely interacted with other people, Sojiro's jump had been an unprecedented shock. Compared to the denizens of the forest, humans were gangly creatures stumbling around on 2 feet. But even with such unsteady legs and feeble arms, one of them had flown through the air like a bird. The impression it left was not unlike that of a city slicker witnessing the lithe, agile grace of a wild puma. Don't worry about it. I simply thought I'd like to see a human body move like that again, if the opportunity arises. It's not like I'm expecting anything from him in particular. Oh, right. Most of your ploys are non-human types, after all, so you were just curious. Aoko slumped her shoulders and sighed, disappointed that Alice's unusual behavior was nothing more than the curiosity of a child coveting a new toy. For her part, Alice did nothing to dispel her roommate's notions. After all, she didn't understand the emotion she'd felt herself. So there might be something there, then. I'll handle dinner tomorrow. If I get fed another lame meal like this the day before exams, I won't be able to muster the energy for an all-nighter. Feel free. I've got things to do anyway. And before Aoko just picks up fast food or something. I don't know. I wonder if she can even cook. Do we know if she can cook or not? I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe we have seen her cook, or she has cooked something and I just forgot. Night passed at the mansion. For better or for worse, it seemed that the changes brought on by the injection of a foreign element were yet to come to a head. "6:30 the next morning, at the crack of dawn. For some reason, Sojiro was walking to school together with Aoko in the frigid air. Alright, whatever you do, avoid being alone in the mansion. True to her warning, Aoko was ensuring Sojiro's safety on the mansion grounds. That said, So sleepy. You sure are an eager beaver, leaving for school at 6 o'clock. Not really, I'm just helping with a half-hour food delivery. There it was again, his unshakable thirst for work. It was hard to imagine he could possibly be ready for exams. More importantly, Yaozaki, you aren't pushing yourself, are you? There's really no need for you to go this far. Don't worry, I can take a nap in the student council room later. I promise is a promise. I'll escort you to the gate. Aoko was thinking. Specifically, she was thinking about what kinds of traps to expect. She didn't really think Alice would go so far as to put a taboo in the forest, but it didn't hurt to be prudent. At the very least, she would guard him on the way out. Yeah, so I guess tensions between Sojiro and Alice are still not very good. If there were any traps, all she had to do was defuse them. Well, calling it defusing was a bit of a stretch. The only thing she could do was destroy them, but after she did that, it would be safe for a while. Though, as far as the way back is concerned, all we can do is trust that even Alice doesn't have that much time to spare. Sojiro's like, what the fuck you talking about, woman? There was nothing they could do if Alice was persistent enough to spend all day going around setting up traps again after the other ones she planted last night were cleared away. They would just have to cross that bridge when they came to it. If they did, it meant Alice saw Sojiro as an enemy invader worthy of that sort of response, worthy of sullying her pride as a witch, which she had obstinately protected for so long. In that case, Aoko wouldn't be able to protect him no matter how hard she tried, so worrying about what might happen during the daytime was pointless. Doing everything she could and giving up immediately when confronted with something she couldn't was just how she was. For her, this policy was the greatest possible concession. She walked beside him as they left the Koonji estate. She would accompany him down the hill, as far as the residential district. Suddenly, she glanced over at him. By the way, have you thought of anything? The question came out of the blue, but surprisingly, Sojiro was able to divine her intentions. You mean about Alice? But it seemed that he had been thinking about it in his own way. According to his friend, there were basically 3 ways of tackling a conundrum like this. First was the roundabout method. This one takes some time, but it's the most natural. People let down their guard when something they like is valued. That's the magic of camaraderie. In short, rather than worrying about the target themselves, focus on what the target holds dear. It was an unusually mature observation for Konomi, but alas, Sojiro had no idea what Alice was fond of. She seemed to care about her mansion, but he had a feeling that doing something like tidying it up would have the exact opposite of the desired effect. At least, he knew he wouldn't want anybody just casually coming up and messing with something precious to him. The second method was an attack from within. But going after them directly is definitely the fastest. For unattractive guys like us, that means leaving the job to external equipment that can make up for our lack of charm. That's right, I'm talking about a present. A quick, decisive battle, and a critical hit. In short, change the target's mind with an expensive gift. Sojiro thought it was a marvelous strategy. The best part was how simple it was. He appreciated the fact that it was easy to understand. But he had a feeling that it would end up the same as the first method. and more importantly, he didn't have the cash for it anyway. Finally, well, I guess you could call it the laid-back approach. I didn't really understand it myself, but His Highness was saying that trying too hard leaves a bad impression. You don't want her realizing she's being picked up while you're doing it. Ideally, she won't even think about it until after you are already dating. Sojiro had no idea what any of that meant, but the point seemed to be not to overexert himself. He agreed completely. It was right to make an effort to be liked. However, there were steps to that. He remembered a time long ago when he had stumbled into the territory of an unfamiliar fox. Back then, he had to put down some of the food he had on hand, but afterward the fox vanished and never returned. Kindness took different forms depending on the person. One-sided goodwill could sometimes be a burden. So, it's fine. I've been thinking about it. For now, I'll do what I can and what I want. And don't worry, I'll follow the advice you gave me. He puffed up his chest as if to say, just leave it to me. It was an utterly unreliable response. Aoko couldn't help but warmly wonder if he really would be okay. You want a broom like the one at school? That's right, preferably from somewhere I can buy it for cheap. But you live in an apartment, don't you? I can't imagine you needing something like that. Oh no, there's somewhere that was bothering me and I wanted to clean it up. I could use some trash bags too. Even though you said you can't afford any excess spending? Well, whatever. Why don't you just use mine? I can lend it to you. Thanks, but I doubt I'll finish it in a day, so I'd rather buy my own. Besides, it's something I want. Rooms are pretty handy. After school, on the way home from work. The time was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, roughly 2 hours before Sojiro usually left his job. Madbear's head chef had tearfully sent him home after being scolded by the treasurer for keeping a student captive the day before exams. Has he even been studying for his exams? And this 2-hour time lag would seal Sojiro's fate, probably. Originally, the plan for him was to meet up with Aoko after she finished her student council duties, then head back to the Koonji mansion. Instead, he was here asking a work acquaintance and fellow student whether or not there were any shops that sold bamboo brooms nearby. I don't get you country folk, too eccentric. You know the crappy ramen restaurant near our school? If you go to the end of the road, you'll find a hardware store called Okita. Assuming you're looking for a full set of cleaning equipment, you can get it cheaper there than at the home center at the west entrance of the station. Not that I care, but do you want to use my bike? I won't be needing it until exams are over anyway. His eyes lit up at the unexpected offer of help, but riding up the hill to the Koonji mansion while carrying shopping bags seemed like it would be difficult. That's okay. I do want to try riding a bike, but I'll have to pass this time. See you at school tomorrow. I feel like he'd crash, especially if he doesn't know how to ride a bike. And if he's just carrying all that stuff too. He thanked his classmate, then started walking to the hardware store. His objective was to get a cheap and durable bamboo broom and a large dustpan, and he wouldn't say no to a hand truck and some poles to use as supports either. Now that he thought about it, he really wanted quite a lot. What the hell is he cleaning up? Like, why does he need all this stuff? Unless he's doing it for, he's using it for a job or something. The girl woke up for her nap and resumed her work. Alice, the Koonji mansion had an annex building, the interior of which served as a library. This place, where the books she had inherited from her mother were stored, was somewhere even her roommate Aoko hesitated to enter. If the Koonji mansion was a witch's house left behind by the times, this library was a fairy tale room forgotten by the ages. You could say it was a perfect sanctuary for a young witch who manipulates fairy tales. She roamed the shelves, guided by memory, and when she happened to look up, she was greeted by a bizarre sight. Is it the bird again? Her dainty features scrunched together into a dissatisfied scowl. Her plans for later went out the window. She watched the scene unfolding outside the window until the sun went down, never once changing her expression. I guess the messenger bird must have told her something. Things are not going according to plan, Alice. We must do something about this. Another day at the mansion. So, though he'd been staying at the mansion on the hill from now on, Sojiro's daily life stayed more or less the same. Wake up, go to work, eat breakfast, go to school. Unfamiliar classes, brief respites, after-school hours. Leave school, go to work, take a nap, wake up, study for exams. Yeah. Okay, well, he is studying then. Contrary to his efforts, the modest boy's modest life passed without him being able to do anything. Sounds like everybody's life. Mundane, boring. His situation didn't change at all. I guess just his living quarters changed. Inside the mansion, Aoko was always by his side, and before bed, he always had to take the same medicine prepared by Alice. The former was Aoko's way of ensuring his safety, while the latter was also ostensibly for his protection, though he didn't understand the reasoning behind it. And, this morning too, he had brewed himself some tea while worrying about his lack of progress. Come to think of it, even though there was no movement to speak of in his relationship with Alice, there was an earth-shattering change here. His morning cup of tea had turned from green to black. There were countless varieties of black tea leaves in the kitchen, but their value is lost on a beginner like Sojiro. Naturally, his was prepared from a tea bag. He poured his tea into his personal teacup, then moved to the dining table in the sunroom. Aoko and Alice were already there, eating in silence. In the Koonji mansion, breakfast was a completely individual affair. The food was simple. To put it gently, it was hard bread that couldn't have taken more than 2 seconds to prepare. Maybe this is Aoko's quote-unquote cooking. Conversation was sparse, and in the end they stood up after drinking a single sip of tea. Alice was already on winter break, so she returned to her room, while Aoko headed to the entrance, school bag in hand. Sojiro cleaned up his tableware and followed Aoko out of the mansion. Then they walked down the long hill to school together. 3 days passed, just like that. By the way, has there been any activity since then? That evening, after classes, Alice shook her head in response to Aoko's question, and continued eating her roll. I see. Then the enemy must be contemplating their next move too. Do we have any idea where they are? Once again, Alice shook her head. Aoko took a bite out of her roll, and then stabbed her fork into the salad. She didn't look particularly disappointed. I see. Well, I'll help out after exams are over, but you're on your own until then. I've got to make sure that idiot does his last-minute cramming, and I don't have any time to spare. Alice's face darkened, as if she had something she wanted to say. That's not a problem, is it? You're on vacation already, so your days are wide open. Certainly, Alice was on the winter break, and devoting all of her time to her activities as a magus. But for some reason, she'd spent the last few days holed up in the library. Aoko's talk of fighting back against the Challenger was the furthest thing from her mind. Alice, are you listening? Understood. I'll work on that too, starting tonight. She answered with a sigh and stood up. What was bothering her, and what had she wanted to say? What had she been doing just 2 hours earlier? Yeah, that's, it must be referring to whatever she's doing in the library, or whatever the bird had told her. I'm guessing it must be the bird that was, that she was looking at. Because if you remember in Chapter 6, I think, she was, and in Chapter 5, it's that, that bird tells her things. Whatever it was, she took it with her when she left the table. Winter break at Masaki High came early, on account of its status as a private school. The closing ceremony was held in mid-December, allowing the school and its students alike a brief respite to recover from the fatigue accumulated through the second semester. Of course, that depended entirely on their ability to safely surmount the customary 3 days of exams standing between them and a long, happy vacation. A radio buzzing with late-night programming, a thermos filled with black tea to eliminate the need to go downstairs to the kitchen, an electric blanket to guard their legs from the winter cold, and a crab bread for a midnight snack. Like this, Aoko's room had been transfigured into an inescapable cramming sanctuary. Congratulations on making it through the first day of finals. Now then, are you ready to be reborn? Sojiro nodded. Yes, master. The person waiting for him when he'd returned from his part-time job had not been Aoko the Magus, but rather Aoko the demonic student council president. Right? She has, 2 personalities. Going back half a day. The first day of finals had ended, and Sojiro was about to head back to the mansion to finally put his plan into motion when... Tonight, you'll be confined to my room. Cancel any work you have lined up for this evening, because frankly, these marks are completely unacceptable. A smiling face wreathed in blue flames appeared before him, his crumpled test papers clutched in her hands. She had doubtless snatched them away by force when Mr. Yamashiro showed up to her in the faculty room, laughing about how they couldn't really expect anything else given how recently he had transferred in. Man, he's so nonchalant about that. That's kind of a problem, I think, for a teacher to be just, like, nonchalant about like a student's failing grades. And so, Sojiro left his usual lodgings in the attic to spend the night in Aoko's room. Ooh, sounds kinky. Everything else aside, Aoko was still an adolescent girl. She was reluctant to let a boy the same age as her into her room. But Sojiro's test scores were even more intolerable. So, her irritability level today was 50% higher than normal. It was only natural for the vein in her temple to be pulsing with anger. First, we'll do our reviews. You use that table over there. She turned her back on him and faced her favorite desk. Meanwhile, Sojiro stood next to a cheap glass table. You sure have a lot of strange stuff. Hey, Aozaki, what's that blue thing? He was nervously eyeing the guitar propped up in the corner. It's sharp, thin, and blue, so it must be yours. Could it be a weapon? He doesn't know what a guitar is? Come on. How naive can he really be? It's an instrument. I'm sure you've seen something like it in the school's music room, and if you keep saying blue, I'll smack you with the pointy end. She probably really would do that too. He resisted the urge to comment, so it's a weapon after all, and sat down on the cushion. What is this madness? Could you relax a little? Normally you're like a big deaf dopey dog. Is something on your mind? For once in her life, Aoko was the slow one in the room. Though Sojiro didn't know why he couldn't calm down either, so they were in the same boat in that regard. Oh, is it the interior design? I bet you're surprised by how different the furniture quality is in here compared to the parlor. That's because besides the bed, everything in here is stuff I brought from home. It's been 2 years since I moved in, and I still can't get used to this mansion. I'm not really sure who could get used to it, to be honest. Having misinterpreted his restless fidgeting to her satisfaction, she dove into studying. The pages of her textbooks and notes flipped by like a VHS on fast forward. There was no opening for outsiders to intrude. Pressured by the aura emanating from her back, Sojiro focused up and faced the table. The fact that he could calmly concentrate on his own work while being completely ignored was proof he was no ordinary person either. 2 hours later. By 11 o'clock, her breakneck pace was finally starting to falter. Sensing an opportunity, he spoke up. Hey, Aozaki. Yeah? She answered in her reserved voice without turning around. Her speed might have been dropping, but she wasn't stopping. I've been watching you and Alice eat dinner these past 3 days. Are your meals always like that? Yeah, what about it? Well, when you put it like that, it's just, at school everyone seems to enjoy themselves, so I thought that's what eating together with somebody was supposed to be like. And then I thought, maybe. There's no maybe about it. Me not talking to Alice has nothing to do with you. We've always been that way. Judging by how steady her voice was, she wasn't particularly bothered by that fact. It's a tense table, huh? Even though I was sure you and Alice would get along. She didn't confirm or deny it, but his disappointed muttering was a little unexpected. Well, you're right about it being tense. I can't count the number of times Alice had slipped mescaline into your drink, and just yesterday she put Japanese rowan in the salad. So she's been slipping stuff into Sojiro's drink. Seriously, what is she thinking? She smiled bitterly as she turned the pages of her textbook, as if she was reminiscing. Mescaline? A psychedelic alkaloid derived from the peyote cactus. Though, since Alice is using it, it's probably just a simple hallucinogen. Anyway, I'm done. So, has Sojiro been hallucinating? Or, did he notice, hey, there's something going on with me. Why am I hallucinating like this? You know, you'd think you would notice something like that if she was, slipping a fucking hallucinogens into his drink. Textbook number 4 snapped shut in her hands. Her back, which hadn't so much as twitched in all this time, abruptly spun around. Now, time for your training. The scores you got on the 4 exams you took today were so I almost fainted. She sat cross-legged and stared at him with an irritated look in her eyes that clashed with the cheerfulness of her voice. Modern Japanese, geography, math, and electronics. If you give the same performance over the next 2 days as you did on those, your winter break is as good as gone. And if that happens, I'm the one that's going to get hung out to dry. Hey, it'll be inconvenient for me too. It's not like I want to go to school on break. He calmly corrected her mistake. That's my line. If you go to school, I'm definitely going to get dragged into it. Despite her best efforts, Mr. Yamashiro's stupid smirking face bubbled up into her mind's eye. But more importantly, I'll be damned if a student is going to get straight zeros on my watch. Strictly speaking, I should beat you into shape from the ground up, but, well, you've got a lot on your plate, so for now I'll settle for your scores. I always cram for tests at the last minute too, so it shouldn't take that long to get you up to speed. His face darkened conspicuously at her proclamation. Apparently he felt there was no need for her to meddle so much in his affairs. Hey, who do you think is going to suffer here, me or you? Even though he had a faintful inkling that it was definitely going to be him, he quietly hung his head. Yeah, don't argue. She'll probably kick your ass. At any rate, it wasn't like he could refuse even if he wanted to. And like she said, her hardships were probably bigger than his. Sorry for being such a bother. He bowed in resignation and gratitude. Good. Don't worry, I'm not a demon. I don't expect you to reach the class average, and if everything goes as planned, you'll be able to go to sleep by 3. Oh, great. 3 in the morning. That's a great time to sleep before her fucking exams. She nodded, apparently satisfied by her student's admirable behavior. Whatever other flaws he had, he should be able to get by as long as he held on to that honesty. Oh, what am I doing? Okay, Shizuki, I don't want you relying on me after this, so let me make one thing absolutely clear. I rarely ever give private tutoring. You have to understand that this is an exception among exceptions. Her words, which seemed more intended to convince herself than him, left him crestfallen. She couldn't help but imagine a sign over his head that said "free to a good home," and hung her head at her own sentimentality. Actually, now that she thought about it, hadn't it been raining the day they met? Time slipped by like sand through an hourglass. So I guess you guys have been studying all night. Finally. She squinted at the soft morning sunlight streaming in through the window and gulped down yet another cup of black tea. Thought they were about to say it was like black coffee or something. It ended up taking all night, huh? He finished her sentence for her, mystified. Her usual spirit was gone. Staying up all night shouting had really done a number on her. Meanwhile, Sodro's complexion hadn't changed one bit since yesterday. Yeah, I really underestimated you. I already told you, flattery will get you nowhere. Flattery, huh? Well, I guess you're not wrong. As shocked as she was half impressed, too. The Mountain Boy's foundation was far too shaky. His academic ability was barely at the middle school level, and that was being generous. Accordingly, there was no choice but to abandon the idea of test prep based around understanding and learning and focus solely on rote memorization for boosting his scores. She'd taken it upon herself to act as his teacher, even if everything he crammed would fall apart like so much papier-mâché come tomorrow. Her fatal miscalculation was that her student was more excellent than she realized. Taking all night to finish studying 4 subjects was one thing, but she hadn't expected him to put so much zeal into making sure nothing he learned went to waste. But you know, diligence is good and all, but you take too long to memorize stuff. Cut me some slack. Before this, I mostly memorized things with my body, not my head. And I guess that's his excuse. It makes sense. You know, he pretty much grew up living off the land, not having to learn anything. I guess it'd be equivalent to, like, somebody growing up in, like, Alaska or something and never having to, like, you know, really get a proper education. Like, just living off the land in Alaska. She sighed in spite of herself. Certainly, experience was more important than knowledge in the mountains. Well, whatever. At least now I don't have to worry about Yamashiro calling me in to discuss your grades. Could you put on another pot of tea? Sure, he replied, getting up as she stretched out her tight muscles. She must have brought tea bags in bulk, because there were still plenty left. Geez, you're so wasteful, Aozaki, he murmured so she wouldn't hear. After a night of harsh instruction, it seemed that getting to see her careless side brought him no small measure of joy. Little did he know that the excess tea bags weren't a mistake at all, but rather supplies for tonight. Oh no, they're doing it again tonight too. She stared at him calmly as he complacently got to work. Not bad, but I should at least teach him how to make it with leaves. Maybe he overheard her thinking out loud, because he suddenly turned around. Is the taste really that different? Totally. Well, if I'm being honest, I don't mind, but Alice is really persnickety about it. Speaking of which, how's it going with her? She draped herself over the table, still littered with textbooks and notes, and questioned him calmly. He shot her a reproachful glare. I only ever see her at meals, and you know how those go. How are we supposed to get along? Really? And here I thought there was hope. You aren't afraid of her, and she's desperate to find a reason to kick you out. It's a good situation. Is it really? I don't understand. Isn't my relationship with her the same as the one I had with you before the amusement park? What's good about that? Well, you're not fighting, right? Granted, it's a unilateral relationship, but considering it's Alice we're talking about, that's not bad. As long as she's searching for a reason, you've got a chance. She's got a bad habit of rising to antagonism, so usually she makes her opponents destroy themselves. Well, that hasn't really happened yet. Her abstract remarks were just making him more and more confused. Knowing that, what you have to do is simple, although whether or not he could put it into practice was a different story altogether. You are losing me, Aozaki. He returned to the table as he spoke, carrying 2 teacups. Aoko took hers and immediately took a sip to wash away her fatigue. But you're right, I still hardly know anything about that girl. I can't even be sure her name is really Koonji Alice, and that's a problem. Sojiro followed her lead, bringing his own cup to his lips. His, however, was simply filled with hot water, not tea. Want me to fill you in? She gazed at him, sitting down right next to her. It was a look that any decent man might have been captivated by. No, I think that sort of thing should be heard from the actual person. His answer was sincere and to the point, as if it was addressed to the absent girl herself. Right. You really are a good match for Alice. Are you trying to hook them up? Hey, this has been bothering me for a while, but what did you say to her in the guest room? Even if she promised, it's unthinkable that she'd leave an outsider alone for half a day. Back then. He remembered how he woke up in the guest room and exchanged 2 or 3 words with Alice. He'd been hard-pressed to call the conversation anything special, but that didn't mean he could talk about it lightly. That was... So, what did you say to change your mind? She pressed him, eager to hear his answer. He frowned, perturbed. He couldn't speak for Alice, but for him it had been something sacred. But the question was who and what was he worried about? Come on, spit it out. Keeping secrets doesn't suit you. Her mischievous smile drew closer. From the looks of things, he wasn't going to be able to avoid talking about it. As he would eventually find out, Aozaki Aoko had a weakness for gossip. Well, I won't tell you what we talked about, but the one thing I can say for sure is that compared to how you're acting right now, it wasn't romantic at all. Wait, did he just imply that how she was acting was romantic? I think she's gonna get offended by that. You were like a demon until a little while ago, so I didn't notice how nice you are. Yeah, that's definitely gonna piss her off. He turned and seriously returned her gaze. She started back in a fluster. Now that he mentioned it, she'd gotten so close to him that their bodies were practically touching. I didn't have a choice. That was just the most effective way. After all, the second I left you to your own devices, you started messing things up. I guess there's the rare dare side of her. She stood up as she berated him. Yeah, somehow, for the first time in a long time, I was able to focus like I used to. It's a real shame that this was a one-time thing. You sure are calm. At this rate, you won't just ace today's test, but your negotiations with Alice, too. Of course. His light-hearted response left her speechless. Even though she'd meant it as sarcasm, she never expected to be answered with a smile. I've changed my plans. First, I'll try direct conversation. After all, unpleasant things won't last forever. She continued staring at him silently as he stood up. He was actually acting reliable, like he had grown a backbone. It was almost enough to make her respect him, just a little. Today, I'll come back by myself and talk to Alice. You have student council business after school, right? Like he said, the last student council meeting before winter break was coming up. Normally, he would wait around until meetings were over, or go straight from school to work. That was one of the ways she looked out for him, by making sure he and Alice were never alone in the mansion together, but... Wait, don't tell me you intend on confronting Alice on your own. I hope it doesn't come to that. If we fight, there's no way I can win. He's right. He would get killed. He calmly answered her astonishment. But it's obvious that things will get complicated if you're there. That's why I'd appreciate you taking your time with Tobimaro today. Are you serious? It felt like a test, but he cheerfully nodded anyway. On one side was Aoko, who understood the gravity of the situation. On the other side was Sojiro, who claimed that gravitas was unnecessary. The morning sunlight streaming in from the window divided the two standing and talking into light and shadow. Which of them was being illuminated? Which of them was lingering in the dark? That went without saying. A scant few seconds of silence passed. Aoko stared intently at Sojiro and... Alright, I won't stop you. Her voice was cool, like always, with no trace of the reticence or wavering from before. Aren't you mad? Not particularly. So, did you come up with something then? A half-assed plan won't get through to her, you know. He frowned, deep in thought. Certainly becoming friends with Alice through conversation alone would be hard, or rather, he had a hunch it would be impossible. When words fail, bait her with gifts. Kinomi Hosuke, one of his very few confidants, misunderstandings included, had given him that advice. Incidentally, it had been intended for use against Aoko, but Sojiro's impression at the time had been this. Nothing good will come from trying that with Aozaki. For starters, I have no idea what Alice is even interested in, and we don't really have anything in common, do we? He crossed his arms worriedly. So, like usual, you haven't thought this through. Not really, but well, I'm pretty sure I'll be fine even if I don't plan every little thing. With Alice, the important thing isn't explaining this or that or getting her to understand. It's His struggle to understand somehow put his ineffable impression into words. His time for reflection was short. With an ah and the slightest of nods. Doesn't it basically come down to whether or not I like her? He said something difficult without batting an eye. Indeed, that was the premise behind everything. It wasn't talking for the sake of being recognized, nor courtship without seeking something in return. Simply wanting to be with the person because you like them. It was the way of a truly selfless, virtuous heart. Though whether it would bring happiness as a human was another story altogether. Calculation and compromise, selfishness and strife. To those that believed that extolling vice and virtue was human nature, such purity was blinding. Or, more precisely, to those who had found themselves unable to believe anything else. She offered no reply to his words and quietly began to walk. Her long hair swayed as she passed in front of him. "Aozaki?" He called out to stop her, noting her somewhat chilly demeanor, but she was already opening the door. "I'm going downstairs to take a shower. You go back to your room." There was no inflection in her voice. He nodded, despite his confusion. "Okay, but, like I thought, you are mad, aren't you?" His question brought the emotion back to her face. However, it wasn't the usual disgruntled expression he knew so well. "Yeah, if I put it in your words, I'm probably mad. I don't really want to say about what, though." "Yeah, I'm a little bit confused myself. What the fuck? What is she upset about?" He didn't even understand that he was the cause. After looking at him, she showed an expression he'd never seen before, just for a moment. "Well, see ya. This may be the last time we talk, so I'll at least say goodbye." I guess she thinks Alice is going to kill him. "You're underestimating Alice too much. But at the same time, that's what makes you strong, even if it's poisonous to me and her." The door slammed shut with a bang. On the other side of the wall, footsteps retreated into the hallway. With no heating to speak of, it must have been as cold as a refrigerator, but it seemed Aoko was used to it. Yep, Sojiro is about to get killed. "Wait a minute, why am I the one leaving? This is all wrong. Normally doesn't the boy go first?" She shooed him out of her room. The wooden door slammed shut with a bang. Surprisingly, the hallway wasn't as cold as he'd expected. At least, it was nicer than a refrigerator. And that was the last time they saw each other. And Sojiro was the only one left. And then he found he got an F. No winter break for him. Oh hey, it's Gendo Pori. Actually, this is the only... I'm not a fan of classical music, I will say that, but this is like the only classical track that I actually really like. It's very calming. Like, it's... I think it was supposed to be like melancholic, I think, or no, was it? I forget the original intention of the track, but yeah. This is it's a very calming song, or, very calming music. And it's used in a lot of video games and anime, I noticed. The second day of exams had ended, and Sojiro was walking back to the mansion alone. As the path went higher and higher, the incline grew and the forest thickened. Since it carried on like that for more than 20 minutes, the residents of the area considered the hill on which the Koenji mansion resided to be nothing less than a mountain. Sojiro, on the other hand, was reluctant to give up that title to a forest that could be traversed just by walking. The road was paved, the trees were sparse enough that you could navigate using the sunlight streaming in through the canopy, and there weren't even any steep slopes or animals lurking in the brush. There was no need to worry about getting lost here, let alone stranded. Pathetic, I was still moping. He quietly berated himself for reminiscing without realizing it. In the weeks since he moved to the city, he'd done nothing but compare it to the mountains. Before, he never would have scolded himself like he did just now, but these last few days, after he got to know Aozaki Aoko, he finally realized that he was stuck. No matter what the reason, he never stopped moving. And, watching her, his own pace naturally began to quicken. The mansion she lived in didn't match her liveliness at all. It was a conspicuous building, even for Masaki. People called it a haunted house. Technically, it was occupied by witches, not ghosts, but either way, the public opinion of the place was probably justified. Yeah, it does kind of resemble that, doesn't it? That said, I wonder which is stranger, ghosts or witches. He racked his brain, conveniently ignoring his own unfamiliarity with life in the city. At any rate, it didn't change what he had to do. Finals would be over tomorrow. That meant the time limit on Aoko's protection was almost up. If at all possible, he needed to make the lady of the house recognize him as her roommate by the end of the day. He walked along the natural wooded path, through a gap in the trees encircling the estate, up to the mansion's front door. Okay. After a single deep breath, he stepped over the threshold. His destination was the parlor where he assumed he would find Alice. And he might be right about that. Either that or she's in the library. However, the sight that awaited him was totally beyond his expectations. A few steps past the entrance, he reached the lobby, the mansion's main hall. Something was out of place. The lobby evoked images of a medieval castle. The cold winter sun cast shadows through the skylight, unspoiled by the touch of artificial light. Wooden tile that smelled of greenery. Black clothes huddled against a great rectangular tree. She was literally leaning on her mansion. Was it a mother's lullaby or a tranquil cradle? The mansion swallowed even the stirring of the air, as if to protect her slumber. Oh, so she just passed out right there, huh? She was fast asleep in the shadows. Her resting figure, concealed from the prying eyes of outsiders, was easily the lobby's most captivating feature. He averted his eyes to the ceiling, embarrassed. Even surprise attacks had a limit. Seeing her slender body slumped by the fireplace like a scene out of a beautiful painting, his heart couldn't take it. There were no signs of life. She was too tranquil, too perfect. Despite leaning against an icy pillar in this frigid weather, she seemed to be at peace. An onlooker could be forgiven for thinking of the eternal sleep called death. Better not disturb her, then. It's like, what do we do in this situation? Do we just kind of let her be, or do we actually, try to talk to her? I don't know. I think she would probably try to kill us if we try to wake her up. Isn't she cold? He muttered to himself while gazing at her absent-mindedly. The very sensible idea of bringing her a blanket didn't even cross his mind. I was actually about to misread that first line as, "Isn't she cute?" For some reason that's what I saw. And then I was like, oh yeah, cold. But I mean, both can be true at the same time. Instead, bafflingly, he decided to brew them some tea. He quietly opened the door and went into the parlor. 3 small round objects were on the table. It was the medicine that Alco told him to take every day when he got back to the house. He swallowed the slightly sweet pills, then moved to the kitchen where he picked out one of the many boxes of black tea and brewed 2 cups. When he finally got back to the lobby, Alice was still fast asleep. He sat down on the ground, mindful to make as little noise as possible. The cold feel of the floor through his pants surprised him. He thought it would be warm by the fireplace, but then according to Alco, this was a hunk of junk or something. Probably neither she nor Alice knew how to maintain it. He took the teacups off the tray and put them down in front of himself and Alice, then abruptly opened his bag and pulled out his classics textbook. Ozaki was mad, after all. An unconscious murmur slipped out as his thoughts ran back to that morning. He still didn't know the reason she'd been mad, or the meaning behind that fleeting expression. What he did know is that he needed to review for tomorrow. Thanks to Alco, he'd done a little better on today's tests, but tomorrow's would be even more formidable. And given what a bad mood she'd been in all day, he couldn't imagine she'd be willing to help him out tonight too. She'll still get upset if I fail, though. Not that it's any of her business. He complained under his breath as he opened his textbook. Apparently, he intended to wait here like that until Alice woke up. The only sound in the hall was the rustling of pages. The ticking of the clock and the commotion of the forest dared not intrude on this nap. After several hours, he quietly stood up. The sunlight streaming into the lobby was changing from white to red. Almost time for work. He stretched out his stiff back and glanced at Alice. She was still sleeping peacefully. He frowned. Was it really okay to leave her like that? He was worried, since he didn't know her daily routine. No, Ozaki will probably be back soon, and it's not my place to interfere. Whatever thoughts led to that conclusion, he nodded to himself and left the mansion. Today's workplace was the Chinese restaurant Mad Bear in the Misaki shopping district. Isn't it always? Isn't that like his main job? Oh great, Chinese food. The uniform had been made with a strong preference for dazzling colors. Its orange apron was emblazoned with a caricature of a polar bear, lasting apart a walk with its mighty claws. That design, which could be mistaken for a sign from the mountainous region, was of unmatched creativity in Misaki. This was the Chinese restaurant Mad Bear. Aside from the name and logo, it was a typical hole-in-the-wall establishment. Though it had begun to feel some pressure in recent years from the increasing number of family restaurants, it had been around forever and regularly received rave reviews. They had a high priority on contact with the residents of the neighborhood, and home deliveries were part of their service. People called it QKS Quick Killer Service, the Bear in the Forest. Currently, it made up the bulk of Sojro's work. He was responsible for the Masaki area, since it was close enough to reach by bicycle. When the delivery site was further away, that was the job for the senior staff's beloved bike, the almighty 50cc King Salmon, though that's neither here nor there. I heard it from a friend in Yashirogi. In between deliveries, the delivery workers spent their free time waiting tables and washing dishes. Since today's dinner rush hadn't hit yet, right now they were in the kitchen happily going about the ladder. Are you listening, Shizuki? I'm listening, Konomi. The two student workers were elbow deep in a giant sink, working with zeal. Or at least, they were going through the motions while they chatted with each other. It's not just that Japanese restaurant Kuniya either. Apparently, Daiteto and Messiya and here in Misaki both got orders like that too. If he wants meat that badly, he should have gone with Shitaishi. I mean, who the fuck gets raw meat and whole salmon delivered? What do you think? It's straight up shady, right? I wonder if he's raising a crocodile or a seal or something. Compared to your other stories, it's definitely unusual. Also, what's a crocodile? A crocodile is a crocodile. You've seriously never seen one? Though I guess I haven't either. Not in person, anyway. Well, he did live in the mountains. I don't think crocodiles really reside there. I'll lend you my copy of Shakes and Shivers, Animal Land Special Africa episode sometime. That should answer all your questions. Yeah, Africa has any number of things that could kill you. After spending so much time with him, Konomi was getting used to dealing with Sojiro. Suddenly, the delivery phone rang, interrupting their rambling conversation. The manager swiftly picked up the receiver and confirmed the order and address. Pizza? Of course we have pizza. The Krusty Krab sells pizza too. When he hung up, all the delivery workers gathered in the kitchen were looking away in different directions. Don't choose me for this job. I'm too busy working here. None of them were eager to rush out into the cold to do their job. Shizuki, it's a little far, but I need you to make a delivery, he called out to Sojiro, evidently unfazed by everybody's gutlessness. Here's all the information. This is a special case, so try to keep it under wraps. He held out a piece of paper with the order and address written on it. Sojiro took it, then quietly frowned. Manager? Yes? The manager looked at him, as if he knew exactly what he wanted to say. I get it, you're worried, but well, when you've worked in this industry as long as I have, you see this sort of thing from time to time. It's not that strange. Now then, I'll get the product from the freezer. The black-clad manager gracefully departed the kitchen, while Sojiro looked on with eyes full of admiration. Apparently, peculiar things happened everywhere. Kinda wonder what was on that paper. Who's he delivering to? Is he delivering to the mansion? Is he like delivering this fucking Chinese to the mansion? You're late. Of course, that's the first thing he's greeted with as the soon. It was past 10 o'clock. Sojiro, who had taken a slight detour after work, was greeted by an enraged Aoko as soon as he stepped through the door. Or maybe the manager was like telling him it's okay to go home or something? I don't know. Her palpable irritation filled him with a sense of relief, though I don't really think so since he got the food from the freezer. So I don't know, I'm wondering where he went. He had no idea why she was upset, but at least it was different from her enigmatic fury from this morning. Late? It just turned 10, right? What's the problem? He set down the cardboard box he'd been cradling in both arms and looked toward the fireplace. The sleeping girl was gone. It didn't just turn 10, it's already 10. You really don't understand the situation you're in, do you? No? Whatever, just come to the parlor. She left him behind with his confusion and stormed off toward the east wing. After pausing to pick his box back up off the floor, he cheerfully followed after her. He took off his coat and put it on the hanger as he entered the parlor. From the looks of things, Alice must have been holed up in her room. The usual pills were on the table. You already took the pills, though. It's partly my fault for not explaining it to you, but you need to respect the curfew, too. That's the whole reason we make these things. She handed him the pills from the table and a cup of water. Huh? I already took those before I left, though, and I'm feeling fine, so what's the rush? What are you talking about? Why on earth would we care about your health? Wow, there's the soon. It looks like you misunderstood, but what you've been taking every time you come back to the house is, to put it plainly, poison. Oh, great. It isn't fast-acting, so the effects only manifest after half a day, but if you don't take more before then, the old poison will circulate through your body and you'll keel over on the spot. So you're telling me that if he was any later, he could possibly die That's so reassuring. Thank you, Alco. Thank you for poisoning me. Alice insisted she'd never be able to trust you if we didn't at least do that much. Look, if you understand, you'll go ahead and take them. To tell the truth, I don't like this either. I'll come up with a more concrete method soon, so just bear with it until then. So, you're totally fine with the possibility that you could murder this guy. I have no idea what you're saying, but basically I've been taking something bad all this time? Does he not know what poison... Oh my god, how do you not know what poison is? He took the pills and gulped them down. Even knowing that they were poisonous, he didn't so much as flinch. It seemed he had no intention of fighting back against Alice and Alco's tyranny. Honestly, using poison to suppress poison, you two are so old-fashioned. He must have found something amusing, because his lips curled into a smile. For her part, Alco couldn't begin to understand what he thought was so funny. Anyway, I was late getting back today because I had stopped by my apartment to pick up my things. If I had known it was a problem, I would have called. Your things? Surely you're not talking about that. She pointed at the cardboard box he'd brought, and he nodded emphatically. It seemed ridiculous to keep paying rent for a place I'm not living in, so I moved out. But I set up so that I could go back whenever I want, just in case, and so I should be fine in 3 months. Rent? Oh, right. How could I forget about that? Alice will be overjoyed when she finds out. Of course. Now we can charge you rent. Was this what they call a blossoming smile? It was pure and honest, like the smile of a child who just hatched a new scheme. To Sojiro, nothing could have been more ominous, and he shivered at the thought of what was coming. Not good things. Still, that's not much. Everything you own fit into one cardboard box? Really? I thought it was plenty. More importantly, is Alice in her room? Yeah, you just missed her. She actually stuck around for a while after dinner, but I guess she got tired of waiting. She glanced at him suggestively. That dauntless smile still plastered on her face. She was waiting? That's right. Maybe she was eager to punish a certain somebody for using her precious falchion and blue calico without permission while she was sleeping. Oh yeah, Alice is very particular about her teaware, or, her ceramic teacup, or, her teacups and her other wares. Don't touch them. Falchion? You mean those tea leaves? Oh, the tea leaves. Okay, the tea leaves and the teacups, probably. Or I guess just the different, more so the tea leaves, I guess. She was really pissed off about him using her tea leaves. Exactly. I was surprised too. I'm used to Alice falling asleep all over the place, but I'd never seen her prepare tea beforehand. I woke her up to find out what she'd been thinking, and she was even more surprised than I was. She wanted to know who was responsible. He clapped his hands together. He'd made tea, but he had absolutely no memory of cleaning it up afterwards. Alco enjoyed watching him squirm. Yeah, I can see that. I see. Then she must have been mad. Naturally, poor Robin got dribbled. Ugh, I'm mad at myself too. I can't believe I didn't tidy up properly. How sloppy can I get? Oh yeah, that was the bird's name, Robin. He chastised himself for making such an obvious blunder. That's not the point. She's upset because you were sitting there watching her sleep. Yeah, well, at least you didn't do the sleep creep. Oh, are you sure? I didn't really think she'd care about something like that. Maybe you wouldn't, but she sure would. She stared daggers at him. I guess that's not really gonna do much to, get on Alice's good side. There was an indescribable force behind the way she said we. You mean, you and Alice? I mean, everyone in the whole damn world. If you go around assuming that other people don't care about something just because you don't, eventually you're going to get burnt. Well, she is right. But in this case, isn't it also Alice's fault for falling asleep in the lobby? There's no way I could just ignore something like that. He has a point too. That's a nice thought, but unfortunately this is her house. You'll be held solely responsible for any misconduct or mistakes that happen within these walls. Catch my drift? He mulled over her words. Basically, you're saying this place is Alice's domain. We've got a winner, though technically it's hers and mine, and as the feudal lords, we get to do whatever we want. She spoke with a smile, then sat down on one of the sofas. Sojiro remained standing behind the sofa across from her, going over the conversation in his mind. She'd talked about her and Alice's domains, but what about her family? Naozaki, how are your parents? He unintentionally blurted out what he was wondering about. Alive. They owned land in Tokawa, 4 stations out from Masaki. I was actually taught by my grandfather, but he's retired now and living on their property. Sounds pretty normal. Apparently, he'd expected something more spectacular from a clan of witches and wizards. Well, my parents are. Apparently, my father's magic circuits were efficient. which is why grandfather says I have 2 generations worth of potential, though I'm not so sure about that. Alice is the one with the sort of family you're thinking of. After all, unlike me, she's from England. She stopped herself there. Sojiro had pledged to hear about Alice's circumstances from Alice herself, so she couldn't take that away from him now. You'll have to ask her if you want to know more, but that's where her love of black tea comes from. Speaking of which, why did you pick today of all days to brew leaf tea? Using a tea bag would have been better. Didn't you say it tasted better that way, and that Alice is fussy about her tea? She was a little taken aback, hearing her own words thrown back at her. He didn't look it, but he was the sort of guy that remembered minor details. Well, whatever. More importantly, could you come back on your own tomorrow too? My stopgap proposal for a mochi pounding ceremony ended up actually getting accepted, so I'll be busy again. What is a mochi pounding ceremony? I seriously have to wonder about that. That sounds weird. There's probably, I mean, obviously it's a Japanese thing, but still. I know mochi is Japanese. But what is mochi pounding? Understood, he nodded. In all likelihood, he had been planning to do that anyway. By the way, how are you holding up, Aozaki? You haven't slept since yesterday, right? I took a 3-hour nap this evening, so I'm fine. If you're worrying about me, you must be feeling pretty good yourself. We'll pick up where we left off last night in a little while. Fantastic. More slave driving, more torture. Where they left off. In other words, more one-on-one cramming. For Sojiro, who hadn't gotten a wink of sleep since then, it went without saying that it would be a trying experience, but he smiled despite himself, reminded of the inscrutable consideration she'd shown him when he first transferred in, and she kept following him around, apprehensively observing his behavior from the shadows. Great, and anyway, the one that's going to suffer is you after all. I'll greatly accept this exception among exceptions. His light-hearted response surprised her, just a little. Honestly, why do you only remember the most useless things? She shrugged her shoulders in exasperation, as if to avert her eyes from that beaming face. The next day. The last day of finals went off without a hitch. For most of the students, December's greatest challenge was behind them. But, for Sojiro, the greatest challenge was yet to come. Trying to get along with Alice. Downtown, he had bid farewell to his classmates who were already getting jittery about tomorrow's closing ceremony, and began his trek to the heart of the Shiro and Izuka forest. It was all the same. As he made his way up the hill, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking through a rehash of the day before. Pretty much, and then he'd find the sleeping Alice again, I'm sure. It'd be funny if she just falls asleep at the same place at the same time of day, every day. Just falls asleep against the pillar. An unshakable resolution burned in his chest. Not only was today the deadline, more than anything, he wanted to hear her voice. Even if he was treated cruelly, even if he was ignored, even if in the end Aoko's smug warning about being trapped in a mirror came true, he at least wanted to greet her. However, what awaited him was somehow more or less what he'd expected. She sure does sleep a lot. Again? Holy shit, he had a dizzying sense of deja vu. Faced with a scene that on the surface was exactly the same as yesterday, he'd blurted out his honest impression. Once again, she was sleeping next to the fireplace. Her legs were tucked to the side, similar to the way young maidens sat in picture books. It looked like a somewhat more comfortable position than yesterday. Sojiro, who from time to time demonstrated miraculous insight, realized what was going on. I wonder what Tobimaro was doing at school alone. Wait a minute. This is a trap. She's trapping him. This is definitely a trap. She knew it was him yesterday. She's doing the same thing today. Stealing a glance back at the entrance, he psyched himself up and rolled up his sleeves. If everything was exactly the same as yesterday, he figured he might as well go along with it. He set down his bag and went to the kitchen. Naturally, he intended to clumsily brew some tea, just like yesterday. And she's not going to get pissed at him for using her tea leaves? Since he'd been scolded for using the falchion, today he repented and reached for the Jackson's fruit and herb. Okay, well at least he corrected that. Sadly, that was his limit. He didn't realize that the problem wasn't the variety of leaf he used, but the fact that he wasn't able to draw out his potential. Well, excuse me for not being an expert at brewing tea. He poured the tea into a pot and returned to the lobby. Once there, he sat down cross-legged by the fireplace, white breath hanging in the air. Then, with a sip of his fruit tea, he pulled a textbook out of his bag. Even though finals were over, he'd been told he would have to take some supplementary lessons for the subjects from the first day, so this must have been fate. Despite being slightly warmer than outside, the temperature in the lobby was far from pleasant. It was the kind of cold that would make a person yearn for warmth. In the midst of that winter chill, Sojiro immersed himself in his electronics textbook. It had been recommended to him as a subject that relatively few students chose to take, but it was the fact that everyone who did started on equal footing which made it slightly more interesting to him than his other classes. But Aoko was right. He finished the tea whose flavor he couldn't appreciate and poured himself another cup. The ceramic pot had excellent heat retention, so it was still warm. It looks like I'm not very good at book learning. He mused idly to himself and continued reading the long string of characters. As there was no electric lights in the lobby, he was entirely dependent on the illumination from the skylight. That light, streaming in at an angle, divided the lobby into light and darkness, and the fireplace on the wall would soon sink into the shadows. In a way, it looked like a ruined castle, drowned in ash, or perhaps a forgotten, faded world of pictures from a somber fairy tale. Within the white ramparts of this room, hours ticked away unseen, desperate to escape the watchful gaze of the sun. And she still is not going to wake up, I'm guessing. And so, after peacefully passing the time, the sound of his textbook snapping shut brought the quiet scene back to reality. Stretching out his stiff shoulder, he cheerfully started cleaning up. He slipped his book back into his bag and left Alice's cup on the floor as it was, and put his own cup on the tray as he stood up. Time for work, just like that. He spoke as if he was trying to convince himself he had no other choice, then left the slumbering lobby. But before that, a noise from behind stopped him in his tracks. Cradling his bag under his armpit and holding the tray in one hand, he turned around. Without disturbing the tea in Alice's cup. "Yo," he jauntily greeted her. Yeah, that's probably not the greeting she wanted. The dark-eyed sleeping beauty was still seated by the fireplace. She was looking at him, just as silent as she had been when she was sleeping like a statue. And, though it was a little too late, he finally noticed the difference between her and Aoko. With Aoko, even if her train of thought was a mystery, she communicated her intentions clearly. Her trademark irritated expression might not give any hints about what had her so out of sorts, but it did constantly broadcast what she was feeling. On the other hand, Alice was a total black box. It was impossible to know when she was angry or upset. What do you want? A sinking question. He couldn't even tell if she was being hostile or skeptical. If it was the former, this could turn into a replay of that night, with Alice as his opponent. The image of that shattered bottle crossed his mind. He knew that if he answered wrong, he might not come out of this alive. But after a moment's hesitation, he steeled his resolve. Or rather... Right, it will take some time to explain, so I'll sit down. Since he couldn't figure out what the right choice was, he decided to just do whatever he wanted. She didn't respond. The black-clad girl seemed unhappy, but Sojiro deliberately ignored her. After he sat down again and set the tray aside, their eyes locked. Her bottomless gaze was doing its best to push people away, like usual. But it seemed he didn't feel pressured at all. Well, what is it? Even though it's a little late, I just wanted to talk like this, with you. Even though he said it would take time to explain, he went ahead and summed it up in one line anyway. With me? Not Aoko? Well, it's true that I want to talk more with Aozaki too, but more than anything, I'd like to have a conversation with all three of us. She was perplexed, unable to get a read on his intentions. Chojuro continued solemnly, totally oblivious to her feelings. Aozaki said that normally you two don't talk. I'd feel bad if that was my fault, and I'd feel even worse if it wasn't. Not talking even though you live together is such a waste. His voice was thick with emotion. She still had no idea what his intentions were. However, she could tell he wanted something from her dearly. And, most unexpected of all, it wasn't motivated by fear. You're not afraid of me? Oh, I don't know enough about you to say for sure. Her wide eyes looked like polished quartz. This wasn't just unexpected, it was astonishing. His reflexive answers were too honest, but for some reason she didn't find that extraordinary boldness unpleasant. Their conversation stopped there. No, what they'd been doing couldn't be called a conversation to begin with. She raised her guard as if she loathed this mysteriously comfortable silence. He took her steely gaze without flinching. With me? You said you want to talk with me. Then why don't you try? It was clearly a challenge. He didn't have anything to talk to her about, nor the intimacy with her to broach the subject even if he did. Nevertheless, he rose to her mean-spirited provocation. Alright, let's talk about that blue bird. I see it around from time to time. Is it your pet? Or, what were they called again? Ploys? Is that bird one of your familiars too? Just for a moment, her eyes flashed with human emotion, full of animosity for that parasite. Why does she hate it so much? It's a ploy, but that useless bird has nothing to do with me. It's just been around for a long time, and I don't know much about it. Then, it's living in this house without permission? I would never allow that. Robin may be useless, but it's still something I inherited from my mother. Even if it does nothing but screw up over and over, it gets a special pass. Really? That's a relief, so you don't have to be useful to live here. I wouldn't say Sojiro is useless, though. I guess he might think that. Maybe that's what he was trying to say, is he's also useless. Faced with his defenseless smile, she averted her eyes and fell silent. After which, Sojiro kept talking by himself. About his part-time jobs, about school, about the amusement parks, and the city, and rent. His useless chattering went on for 20 minutes, until, finally, he noticed the time. So basically just small talk. Sorry, I really need to go to work now. Clearly, he wasn't thinking, if he was throwing away this long-awaited chance so easily. He took the tray back to the kitchen, set his bag down in the lobby, and walked toward the entrance. His apparent lack of interest took her by surprise. That's why she was about to watch him leave when... Wait. Even though it was pointless, she unintentionally called out to stop him. Yeah? Well, there was a pot this time. Oh, right. That was one of the things I needed to fix from yesterday. Though in the end, I was the only one that used it. I see. That pot is a multi-use type that's used for coffee, too, so it's not suitable for herbal tea. His eyes widened. Now that she mentioned it, there had been a lot of different pots and cups in the kitchen. Apparently each variety of tea had its own associated tea set. It's more complicated than I thought. So you're saying I shouldn't mess with things I don't know about, huh? He sighed. Ugh. Why didn't you wake me up? Either she wasn't listening to him, or that wasn't what she wanted to ask him all along. She cut him off with her own question. He grew reticent, unsure how to answer. Now that he thought about it, the idea of waking up Alice had never once crossed his mind. I just kind of figured she'd be angry if he actually did wake her up. Tell me, why didn't you try to wake me? Why didn't you expect me to wake? Her gaze was dripping with murderous intent. No falsehood would deceive those deep, dark eyes. The evening lobby had been transfigured into a courtroom deciding life and death. Lies or unsatisfactory answers would not be tolerated. In this tense atmosphere, which carried the distinct impression that his heart would be skewered no matter what he said, he felt no fear, only pain. Koenji Alice's voice was cold, and rejected any possible answer he could give. He was vaguely reminded of a baby chick standing on its own after falling to the earth. The gasp of one left behind, holding on to a thread of hope yet detesting where that hope lied. Do I have to say? She nodded. Alright then, but it isn't like there was any deep meaning behind it, just, you're supposed to let sleeping dogs lie. I'm in no mood for jokes. It's not a joke. I thought it was best not to disturb you. Even though I wanted to talk to you, it seemed like I should wait until next time you were awake. That's quite the easygoing attitude, even though I heard Aoko will only be protecting you through today. Even though this is your last chance to curry favor with me. Or could it be, even though you've been given so many warnings, you still don't understand anything? He didn't understand anything. He'd made a promise, grasped the situation, and exchanged words with her as a human, so there should no longer be any need to kill him. If that was what he was thinking, she would take it upon herself as a witch to smash that common sense notion here and now. Trivial misconceptions wouldn't do either of them any good. Yeah, I don't understand. How could I understand things like magecraft or magic after just a few days? All I know for sure is that I've done everything you and Aoko told me to. Then why? Why didn't you wake me and beg for your life? Her eyes finished. She'd seen it. The expression he made when he stood up to leave. If that's how it is, there's nothing I can do. That face, what on earth had it meant? Even if you ask me that, right, I guess I thought if the opportunity didn't present itself, then that's just how it was. Seeing your sleeping face just, I don't know, had me at a loss. You seemed unapproachable, but in a different way than Aoko. He clumsily tried to put what he'd felt at that time into words. The impact of the sleeping beauty who needed somebody yet wished for nobody. I see, but you're trying anyway, even though the opportunity never came. It did come. That's why I wanted to do what I want and be reckless too, at least for today. Even though if what you say is true, I'll just reject you? Well, that's the problem, isn't it? He stole a glance at the entrance. It was a meaningless act, but he couldn't help himself. Probably, I'm not the only one who wants to do something about it. His questioning response was also directed at her. She knew that it was a mistake. Everything was his misunderstanding. A pure, wretched, tiny kindness, like reaching out to a kitten on the verge of death. To her, it felt like thorns. For the first time in a long time, her chest hurt. Still, I don't accept you living here. She looked down as she spoke, as if to conceal her feelings. From where Sodro was standing, he couldn't see that she was making the same face Aoko had back then. I figured, that was never a problem we could solve right now. But maybe someday, things will be different, so until that time comes, it's okay if you keep hating me. The breath that caught in her throat said it all. Until then, you can hate me. She'd never, no, only once longed for such words. Besides, it's not just you, I'm pretty sure Alzaki doesn't want me here either. So getting you to accept me is asking too much. No matter what, I'm different from you two. In which case, all I can ask is that you tolerate me. It won't be easy, but if I can at least avoid bothering you when we're together, shouldn't it be possible? He was right, of course, but if he could do that, there wouldn't be a problem. As soon as she thought that, she nodded in understanding. There was no way he could have planned it, but the moment they started conversing like this, she'd fallen into his trap. For instance, if I could sleep even with you next to me? That's a perfect example. He shot her a beaming smile, then exited the lobby. She did nothing to stop him. Well, I guess she more or less accepted him. Shutting the front door behind him, he began walking to work with a newfound spring in his step. But before that, really, spying is a nasty hobby. He muttered a complaint that seemed to be directed at someone. Maybe himself? A few minutes after Sodro left the mansion, a long-haired figure stole into the lobby, taking care to mask its footsteps. It was none other than Alzaki Aoko, who had been eavesdropping from outside the whole time. You're home? Alice addressed her sullenly. She must have been outside for quite a while, because her body was trembling. Aoko insisted that gloves were terrible, and staunchly refused to wear them in all but the bitterest cold. Unfortunately for her, that meant her slender fingers had turned tragically red. Yeah, I just got back, so how'd it go? From the looks of things, you had a nice chat. She spoke cheerfully while blowing on her hands to warm them. Oh, he was talking to Aoko. I thought he was talking to himself. As soon as she saw that mischievous smile, Alice realized what had happened. I didn't think you'd go so far for him. Was it out of pride or obligation? I guess I was just going with the flow. Anyway, how'd it turn out? Didn't you say you would resort to force if he got on your nerves? Faced with Aoko's good mood, Alice's face was growing darker and darker. Going back to last night's dinner, thanks to the incident in the lobby, Alice's suspicion toward, or perhaps her interest in, Sodro was sparking off the charts, and she had instructed Aoko to send him home alone again. Today's sleep was medicinally induced in order to replicate the same situation as yesterday. Oh, okay. So that's why. But though the setup was identical, things had gone in an unexpected direction. While her roommate took it all in with bated breath from just across the wall, it was thoroughly unamusing. And the fact that something so utterly trivial was actually getting to her only made it worse. Alice stared at the teacup on the floor and traced her white finger over its icy rim. You were right. He's harmless. For now, anyway. She tried to hide her irritation from Aoko under a facade of cold indifference. Though by that point, it was already a foregone conclusion. Oh, is that all? And here I thought it was a pretty lengthy conversation. For you, anyway. Aoko persisted, in pursuit of a confession. Alice stared at her roommate calmly. You weren't upfront with me, Aoko. She denounced her misconduct with a hint of hostility. The air in the lobby froze. The two girls locked eyes, as they each tried to discern the other's next move. I should have known that you'd find out, but this one thing I can't concede. Aoko lowered her stance and glared at Alice. I'm not saying I'll take all of it. You can keep, yes. How does 30% sound? Alice, unperturbed by Aoko's transition into battle mode, simply shut her down with her eyes. You're knocking me down from 100 to 30, and you think I'll just let it slide? What are they talking about, like money? Aiming too high will be your downfall, Aoko. Alice didn't move, maintaining her dignified posture. They stared at each other in silence like that for what felt like an eternity. Aoko ground her teeth in frustration. At this rate, they might fall into internal strife before they even got a chance to have a showdown with the enemy. And on top of that, no matter how she looked at it, she was at a disadvantage here. Seems like that's the case all the time. They're about to start fighting each other. Cheapskate. She clicked her tongue and admitted her defeat. Fine, I don't like it, but I'm willing to settle for a 60-40 split. She offered a regretful compromise, while Alice nodded in satisfaction. Acceptable. This may be my house, but you were the one who invited him here. In exchange, though, it's only fair that you be the one to collect. Fine. This sucks. I should have taken up alchemy. Then this wouldn't sting so much. I doubt that. Those guys have really had it rough since the bubble burst. Aoko absent-mindedly nodded along with Alice's strangely emphatic response. Right now, they were seriously arguing about how they would split up Sojiro's rent money. Okay. It was a dispute unbecoming of Magi. The fact that they were extorting rent money from him after forcing him to live here against his will went beyond swindling, into the realm of violence. But I guess if you're talking like that, it means you finally decided to accept him? Good, Aoko nodded to herself. I haven't decided anything, but it is my fault he wasn't detected by the barrier that night at the park. I can't place all the blame on you and your promise. My promise, huh? Aoko looked up at the ceiling as if recalling the night at the amusement park. It had scarcely been a week, yet she had a feeling her connection with Sojiro had strengthened considerably since then. Or maybe their fates had been intertwined since the moment they met. She couldn't see the future, so there was no way for her to know for sure. Well, setting aside things like fate and fortune, he may be strange, but he's a good guy, she murmured to herself, not seeking any particular validation. Alice looked displeased. Something about what Aoko just said must have rubbed her the wrong way. Aoko, do you know about his scar? Scar? She brought her slender fingers to her mouth in an attempt to take it back. It had slipped out in the heat of the moment. A secret just for her, that she knew she shouldn't spread, but couldn't stop herself from bringing up. Well, she'll know soon enough. Aoko looked puzzled by Alice's question. I see. For some reason, she was relieved. It seemed the sudden antipathy she'd felt toward Aoko had melted away too. How fortunate. And so, without specifying what was fortunate or how, Alice took a sip of her cold tea. As soon as she did, her lovely face wilted into a grimace. This is terrible. She ruthlessly put the cup back on the floor. Her black clothes rustled solemnly. Just a single cup of that crudely brewed tea was enough to send her running to the parlor to wrench the taste out of her mouth. Aoko saw her off, then reached out a faltering hand and picked up the abandoned teacup. She knew she shouldn't, but Alice's violent reaction had piqued her curiosity. After trying a sip, she too quietly put the cup back on the floor. That's why I told you to use a tea bag, you dummy. Just like Alice, her face was twisted in disgust. Ugh. I can only imagine the taste.